During the 1920s, Sherlock Jr. was the least popular of all Keaton's silent features. Earning $450,000 at the box office, it was his lowest grossing feature, just behind 1923's Three Ages. But over the last few decades, Sherlock Jr.'s reputation has risen. Since the centennial of Buster Keaton in 1995 and the release of his films on video, Sherlock Jr. has joined The General and The Navigator as Keaton's most highly regarded silent comedies. How did this change occur? The General, Keaton's personal favorite, is both more epic and more cinematically beautiful. The Cameraman is more romantic. Steamboat Bill Jr. is more physically daring. Our Hospitality is more quaintly majestic. And Seven Chances has more gags. So, what distinguishes Sherlock Jr.? The answer is pretty simple. Despite being a mere 45 minutes in length, almost a long short film rather than a feature, Sherlock Jr. employs many of the best elements of Keaton's childhood in vaudeville. His work with Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle and his own creative short films. At the same time, the plot of Sherlock Jr. has a symmetry that foreshadows his later films. Not only that, but it's just plain funny. In November 1923, Keaton began the film under the working title of The Misfit. It was filmed during the winter months of 1923 and 1924 and released in April of 1924. The most celebrated sequence in Sherlock Jr. is that which introduces the boy's transition from reality into dreams, from theater projectionist to the world's greatest detective. The sequence is a stunning combination of theatrical and cinematic tricks involving lighting, double exposure, and mats. Audiences found it amusing, but it had to have been astounding to other filmmakers at that time, those who understood the extraordinary technical complexity of this deceptively simple-looking scene. The boy's dream begins with an effective double exposure that separates the dream Buster from his sleeping counterpart. Meanwhile, as Hearts and Pearls begins on screen, the characters transform via simple fading effects from the projected movie's actors into the people the boy knows in real life. Dream Buster moves from the projection booth into the theater, where we see a theatrical effect. What appears to be a movie being projected before a silent film audience is actually a carefully brightened set. This theatrical effect allows Buster to jump from the orchestra pit into the film and to be thrown out of it, onto the stage, and back into the audience. Buster, the character, freezes for a moment, and Keaton, the director, inserts a simple cut. The background stage set is replaced by a piece of film showing the front door of a mansion. When Buster walks off the steps, the background again shifts from one location to another by a simple cut. Now that Buster is positioned on the other side of the screen, the type of effect changes yet once again. Using black tape to mat off the area inside the movie screen, Keaton's cameraman Elgin Leslie first filmed the theater set, then rewound the camera to the beginning of the film sequence. When the crew went on location to shoot the beginning of the film within a film, Leslie inverted the process, removing the black tape from the area inside the movie screen and blacking out the theater section. According to Keaton, surveyor's instruments were used to precisely match his position on screen as his character jumps from one dangerous environment to another, until he finally pops out into a garden when the movie fades out. Others have suggested that Leslie snipped a frame out of the end of each sequence to show precisely where Keaton was at that moment. Then, when the crew went to the next location, he held the snippet up before the camera to place Buster exactly where he needed to be for the beginning of the next sequence. As the next sequence begins, we see another matted double exposure showing the theater audience. Then an iris in, followed by quick cut to the living room set in the studio. The boy's dream has taken over completely. And the interplay between audience member and motion picture has been a source of comedy as early as 1901 in R.W. Paul's The Countryman and the Cinematograph. Like Sherlock Jr., the film achieves this effect through a double exposure. In the 2 decades that followed, however, the technique had become much more sophisticated. In Roscoe Arbuckle's 1918 comedy short Moonshine, more than 40 deputies exit a small car. It's a popular circus trick. But what makes Moonshine different is that there appears to be no way for them to enter the car. One can see around and under the car. The use of black tape and double matting created the illusion. Perhaps the most spectacular use of multiple matting occurs in The Playhouse in 1921, where the technique allows 2, 3, and as many as 9 versions of Keaton on screen simultaneously. When Buster was a child performer in vaudeville, he became fascinated by the popular magicians of the day, including Harry Houdini and Ching Ling Fu. He incorporated some of their tricks into Sherlock Jr. Here, for example, we see Detective Sherlock carefully folding a dress into a hoop and setting it in a window. The outside wall fades away to allow us to see both the inside and the outside of the building. Sherlock grabs the stolen pearls from the villains and jumps through the hoop. Suddenly, he is disguised in the hat and dress, allowing him to escape. This is no camera special effect, it's theater magic, plain and simple. In another memorable bit of theater illusion, Buster appears to jump through the body of his assistant, Gillette. As film historian Kevin Brownlow discovered, the body of Gillette, played by actor Ford West, was raised on a platform while the suitcase and dress concealed a small trap door in the fence. West's head and shoulders remained in place with the dress, slit up the back, hanging down to cover the trap door. As Buster dove straight through both the case's trap door and the fence's trap door, the platform dropped down to complete the illusion and allow Gillette to walk away. In another sequence, Buster showed off his skills at the pool table without benefit of camera effects. According to Sherlock Jr. gagman Clyde Bruckman, Buster created many of the shots by practicing with one ball at a time, dusted lightly with talcum powder so he could figure out how the balls would travel when hit. Eventually, he could perform very complicated pool shots. One particular shot is missing from most prints of Sherlock Jr. and has now been restored to its proper place. Modern audiences probably don't realize that Keaton, who had always been fond of parody and satire, picked up some of his ideas from other silent films. In Mystery of the Leaping Fish, 1916, Douglas Fairbanks leaves his house through an unlocked safe door, just as Buster does in Sherlock Jr. In the same film, Fairbanks parodies Sherlock Holmes, playing a drug-addictive detective named Coke Anyday. One of the intertitles in Sherlock Jr. has a double meaning and leads us to another film reference. Not only does this refer to the 3 well-known razors of the day, Gillette, Jim, and Eveready, but also to actor William Gillette, who was famous for having played Sherlock Holmes on stage and in film for a generation. Interestingly, the Gillette play had been made into a silent film only a couple of years earlier, starring John Barrymore as Holmes in 1922. When actor Ward Crane, the villain, is called a sheik, it is a pointed reference to Ben Turpin's 1923 comedy The Shriek of Araby, in which Turpin is also a film projectionist who falls asleep, only he dreams he's Rudolph Valentino. The Turpin film not only features Ward Crane in the cast, but also co-stars Catherine Maguire, Buster's leading lady from Sherlock Jr. Yes, that really is Buster Keaton controlling that driverless motorcycle while sitting on the handlebars. According to what Buster told his third wife, Eleanor Keaton, he practiced extensively, occasionally falling off or crashing until he was able to guide it where he wanted to go. Well, most of the time. According to historian John Montgomery, some of the falls were so dangerous that in one take, Buster hit, quote, both cameras, knocked down the director, and collided with a car. In fact, Buster got so used to falling off the motorcycle, he doubled as Gillette, taking the fall here as well. As dangerous as this sequence was, it wasn't purely stunt work. Sometimes Keaton resorted to special effects. The cameraman sometimes undercranked the film, meaning that the cycle was moving at a slower speed than it appears to be going. Notice that the collapsing bridge in this scene is actually a miniature. This miniature, however, is very obvious. Buster is saved when these two trucks merge at just the right moment to create a bridge. We see what appears to be a very dangerous stunt. This was actually accomplished by using a double exposure. Look closely and you can see where the screen is split almost in half. In the top half, Buster rode safely over the bridge. The bottom half was filmed with the two trucks showing up in the nick of time. Then there's this shot, where Buster approaches a train track just as a train rapidly approaches. Dangerous? Possibly, but not as dangerous as it looks. Watch carefully, and you can see that it was shot in reverse. Buster Keaton may have been a brave risk-taker, but he was no man's fool. Although Buster Keaton is the only credited director of the film, there's controversy about the participation of Buster's film mentor, Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle. From 1914 to 1921, Roscoe Arbuckle was a leading figure in the American film industry as a comedy star, writer, director, and independent producer. During this period, Arbuckle was a close second in popularity to Charlie Chaplin, and as such was Chaplin's most serious rival in the late teens and at a time where dozens of comedy stars were making short films. In 1917, Keaton joined Arbuckle's comique studio as a supporting player, gag writer, and assistant director. Keaton said Arbuckle taught him the mechanics and technical aspects of filmmaking. Roscoe and Buster quickly became close friends. After leaving Hollywood for a year's stint in the Army in World War I, Keaton returned to Arbuckle in 1919 despite offers of more money from rival studios. Only a few months later, Arbuckle was offered a multi-million-dollar contract to star in a series of feature films for Paramount Studios, and Buster was spun off into his own studio. In an uncommonly generous gesture, Arbuckle gave his blessing to Keaton's solo career by sending out this promotional photo of his rising protege and proudly calling him, quote, a worthy successor, one who could make you laugh even more than I do. Tragically, a scandal in September 1921 ended Arbuckle's career as a film star. While on a short trip to San Francisco, Arbuckle gave a small party at the St. Francis Hotel. A young lady named Virginia Rappé became ill at the party and died 4 days later. Arbuckle was accused of manslaughter and after 3 extremely public trials was finally declared innocent. The final jury even declared that Arbuckle deserved an apology. Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle became the first actor to be blacklisted in the history of Hollywood. Buster Keaton was severely affected by what was happening to his best friend, and that reaction is apparent if you look closely at his films of 1922. Up until Cops, which came out in March of 1922, Keaton's films were usually presented without a production company credit. But Cops, which was in production during the trials, is listed under Arbuckle's old comique banner, a subtle homage to Keaton's besieged friend. During the scandal, only a few Hollywood figures publicly attacked Arbuckle. One of these was cowboy star William S. Hart. A few months later, Keaton made The Frozen North, brutally mocking Hart's straight-faced histrionics. Once Arbuckle was blacklisted and unable to appear on screen, Keaton hired Arbuckle as a writer and director. Arbuckle is now known to have written, and at least partly directed, the Keaton three-reeler Daydreams. Strangely, Daydreams, partially filmed in San Francisco near where the scandal began, is the only Keaton short to be missing a significant amount of footage. Even now, more than 5 minutes of it remain lost, including what is believed to be about 3 minutes of footage shot in San Francisco. For Sherlock Jr., Keaton again hired Arbuckle, this time to direct. In his autobiography, My Wonderful World of Slapstick, Keaton said, quote, "The experiment was a failure. Roscoe was irritable, impatient, and snapped at everyone in the company. He had my leading lady, Catherine Maguire, in tears a dozen times each day." Doris Dean, who married Arbuckle in 1925, is reported to have claimed that, quote, "Roscoe directed the picture from start to finish and provided the story idea as well." Did Arbuckle actually direct any of Sherlock Jr.? And if so, how much? Let's take a look at the evidence. Could Arbuckle have come up with such a surreal story? Yes. In 1916, after seeing the Winsor McCay Rarebit Fiend cartoons, Arbuckle began to play with dream sequences in his own films. First in He Did and He Didn't with Mabel Normand, and then again in Good Night Nurse in 1918, co-starring Keaton. But Keaton also liked to play with dream sequences. In Convict 13, The Haunted House, The Playhouse, The Frozen North, Did Arbuckle have the time to work on Sherlock Jr.? Maybe. During the 5 months that Sherlock Jr. was being filmed, Arbuckle was directing 2 comedy shorts starring his nephew, Al St. John. Although each short took a couple of months to make, there was still time for Arbuckle to have worked on another film. Is there other evidence suggesting that Arbuckle might have directed Sherlock Jr.? Yes. If Buster directed all of Sherlock Jr., then who was the director Montgomery referred to, whom Buster supposedly mowed down with the motorcycle? Obviously, it wasn't himself. In 1931, Arbuckle directed the sound short Wendy Riley Goes Hollywood, starring Louise Brooks, in one of her last film appearances.
Oh, Mr. Snell, I think it's great. Photographs like that ought to do me a lot of good, don't you think?
Yeah.
In the short, Roscoe Arbuckle recreated the 2 train shots filmed at Atwood, but not any of the material filmed at Chatsworth. This suggests that he was involved in the Atwood location filming of Sherlock Jr., but not the scenes shot in Chatsworth. In addition, there is that reversed shot of Buster on the motorcycle. Keaton rarely reversed film. Arbuckle did it frequently. So this brings us back full circle. It is fairly safe to say Buster Keaton directed most of Sherlock Jr., and perhaps all of it, but Roscoe Arbuckle may have directed some of it. It's unlikely, however, that Arbuckle directed all of it. Which other segments did Arbuckle likely direct? The I Lost a Dollar routine, which featured Arbuckle's soon-to-be wife, Doris Dean. All or part of the motorcycle ride, and the train sequences filmed at Atwood. At the time of its release in 1924, Sherlock Jr. was a box office disappointment. In terms of revenue, Sherlock Jr. comes in dead last out of the 12 features Buster Keaton starred in between 1923 and 1929. Buster Keaton said of it, quote, "Hospitality outgrossed it, Battling Butler outgrossed it, College outgrossed it, Steamboat Bill outgrossed it, and then at MGM both The Cameraman and Spite Marriage outgrossed it. It was all right, it was a moneymaker, but it wasn't one of the big ones. Maybe it was because at the time it was released, the audience didn't pay so much attention to the trick stunts that were in the picture." Distribution problems may have contributed to the film's relative box office failure. Although the credits say Sherlock Jr. was released through Metro Pictures, the film is actually one of the first features to be released following the merger of the Metro, Goldwyn, and Mayer studios that created MGM. Released during the confusion of this huge merger, Sherlock Jr. may not have gotten all the advertising and support it normally would have. Period reviews of Sherlock were very mixed. The New York Times praised the film. Quote, "This is an extremely good comedy which will give you plenty of amusement so long as you permit Mr. Keaton to glide into his work with his usual deliberation." Variety, on the other hand, was brutal. As unfunny as a hospital operating room. It's a flop. It can't hold a candle to the chase that Harold Lloyd staged in his last picture. Modern film critics and fans see Sherlock Jr. in a more positive light. In 1991, Sherlock was named to the National Film Registry. In 2000, it was 62nd on the American Film Institute's 100 Years, 100 Laughs list. And in 2005, Time magazine placed it among the top 100 films of all time. Though it wasn't much of a success during his lifetime, Sherlock Jr. has since become a cinematic treasure, beyond Buster Keaton's wildest dreams.